With the world building, I know that you settled on a French-inspired seaside setting.
Mhm.
How much research do you have to do for that? And also, how do you use that setting to deepen some of the themes of your book?
The setting was really fun. So first of all, when I was in high school, I was studied in Germany for a year. So I had spent a year in a very small seaside village on the northern coast of Germany. And I had always had that in the back of my head that I wanted to do a seaside setting in a book, but the right story had never come along. So after I did that first draft that I threw out, that first draft was a very vague European sort of Renaissance setting without any detail. And one of the things that I knew I needed to do in the second draft was to really focus on the setting and make the setting come alive. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do a seaside setting. But at the same time, I had just got back from a vacation in France and I was absolutely obsessed with France, and I got to visit Normandy, and the beaches there had such an impact on me. So I kind of just merged the two, and I thought, I'm going to use my seaside setting, but I'm going to do it in France because that's where my passion is right now. And once I figured that out, everything else sort of clicked for the setting, because I started to think about how I wanted to have a really unique death mythology. So I put myself back, several hundred years ago and thought, if I'm sitting in a seaside village and I don't have any of the data and technology we have about how the world works and what's out there, what am I going to think about the world around me? What am I going to think the stars are up in the sky? And so immediately I thought, well, of course, they're going to think that they're lanterns lit by their loved ones. And of course, they're going to think their loved ones are going to be off sailing in the sea and the sky, because if you stand and look at the ocean, it can very often look much like the sky and you can't quite tell where the line is. So to me, that was sort of a logical jump that people would have made, that when their loved ones died, they sailed up to the sea and the sky, lit the lanterns that they could see in the nighttime sky, and then sailed off into eternity. So from there, I was just able to build on the mythology of what would it take to get up to the sea and the sky, and what kind of supplies would they need, and all of that filled out the world building for me.
Makes sense. And then I was going to ask you about that sequel again, and that's just
I will tell you, I don't think there's going to be a sequel. I think I love this wolf, but I might be done with it. The companion, yeah.
So, instead of the question you can't answer that I was going to ask, let me ask you this. You've said elsewhere that you're acutely aware of the imbalances, and I'm quoting you, so I'm going to get this right. You're acutely aware of the imbalances that exist in our society on both a personal and a societal level. It is my hope that by exploring these themes in my books, middle grade readers can learn to recognize injustice and inequality, which may help those experiencing it on a personal level, and potentially readers to eventually become a part of the solution. So how do you explore those themes without, writing an essay rather than a fictional story? And then how are you hoping to see that your readers becoming a part of the solution manifest? What can readers do after they've read your fiction to make that a better future?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I told you that I threw out the first draft and I wrote a second draft of this book. When I wrote that second draft, I sent it back to my same reader, and she read it again and said, the first half is perfect. You absolutely nailed it. The second half doesn't really work because you go all political. And the entire second half of the book turned into this political thing about getting this man who was abusing power. I don't want to go into too much detail and spoil things, but there is a man named Lord Mayor Vulpine who definitely abuses his power in this story. And so I really veered away from exploring death and grief in that version of the story and sort of was working on getting him out of office. And that didn't really work for the story, although it felt very good for my heart. And so I threw out that second half again, and I rewrote the story again, and I focused it much more cleanly on death and grief. But because that's something that's really important to me and tends to show up in my work, I still wanted readers to see that in this society, there was an abuse of power going on, and there were the haves and the have-nots. And it's my hope by showing that readers can become aware of the fact that this exists. It's also my hope that young readers who are living lives where there is an imbalance of power, whether it's because they are poor, or it's because they are in a traumatic situation where somebody is controlling their life in an uncomfortable way. Very often as children, we feel very powerless when that happens. And so I wanted to give them an example of a story where that is happening in another society so that they feel that they're not alone. But then I also wanted to show them that there are people who see that and who are working against it, and change may not happen right away, but change can be made in increments over time. And as you grow up, you do gain more power and the ability to make changes and make choices that will impact change. So it's some of those themes that aren't necessarily tackled directly in my story, but I hope that readers who are looking for them can find them, and maybe perhaps, if they go back and reread the story when they're older, or if they're rereading it with adults in their life, they can start to pick apart some of those more minor themes in the story.
And you wrote the first draft in what, about a month initially?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And when was that approximately?
2019. So that would have been May of 2019, I wrote the first draft. And then June or July of 2019, I wrote the second draft. And then I spent about 6 months rewriting that second half. I sent it to some more beta readers, picked things apart, did a little bit of revision, and then started querying in the early part of 2020.
Gotcha. Just curious, we're talking about
Yep.
with fear of wealthy people abusing their power and politicians run amok. So I just wonder, what about?
Yes, it's possible that there's an awful lot of my own personal feelings written in, but at the same time, I don't want to make it out that this story is about politics, or that it's only appropriate if you have a particular political view, because that's not the case at all. I think everybody has the right to their own political views. It's just something that was brewing inside of me and that I wanted to explore on the page.
I would like to think that everybody who's not currently using the money that's not going to feeding kids or providing health care to travel to space, everybody that's not doing that would agree that there's an imbalance of wealth and we maybe need to do something about it. I would hope that that's not a tremendously political statement.
I hope so too.
But if the last couple of years has taught me anything, it's that it probably is.
It's entirely possible.